Mm. Hi, this is Mr. Tan, your English tutor. As you can see from my background, this is a brief description of my credentials. I've been a teacher for the past 20 years, and part of the time I was teaching in a mainstream MOE school, and the other part were years spent as a tutor in my private capacity, as well as affiliated with the tuition centers. I'm also a published writer, and I have published many fiction and non-fictional works over the past 2 decades. Hence, I am particularly interested in bringing out this creative writing talents among my students. So without further ado, I will go straight into what we are here for today. First and foremost, we are talking about the English language GCE O-level syllabus 1128. First thing first, before we want to do well in a particular task, we need to know what is the parameter and what we have to do to optimize our efforts in achieving the desired outcome. Hence, I've put this markup syllabus for your reference. Let me just enlarge this. Okay, and I'm going to just scroll this. By now, you would already have been very familiar with the 4 papers in your English language. Your paper 1, which is your writing, paper 2, comprehension, paper 3, listening comprehension, and paper 4, oral communication. Now, let's take a look at writing. What I have endeavored to do here is to regross the marks so that you can see the relative weightage of each component and even each subcomponent. We can see here editing makes up 5%, and that is a total of 10 questions. Situational writing makes up 15%, and continuous writing the other 15%. So all in, writing accounts for 35% of your total weightage. Your paper 2 comprehension is made up of 3 text types. So you have the text type 1 making up 3.5%, text type 2 making up 14%, and the last text type 3 making up 17.5%. So all in, this is also accounting for 35% of the total weightage. Listening comprehension, which is made up of section A, 8%, and section B with the note-taking component, the balance 2%. So all in, LC will account for 10%. Paper 4, oral communication, is made up of 2 parts. So your reading aloud, which accounts for 6 2/3%, and your spoken interaction, the remaining 13.1/3%. Now, while this is just plain mathematics, I want you to dig a little deeper. In terms of the weightage and the time that you need to prepare for each of the components, you would realize that there are some strategic points that you can take note of. First, I would like to highlight oral communication, all right, which accounts for 20%. Now, that is actually quite substantial, considering the fact that you are only being tested for 20 minutes, 20 minutes of your time, and you could garner up to about 18% of your paper, assuming you are, up to scratch. In fact, I would say that the average student should be able to get at least about 16%. And if you put in the extra effort and give yourself a little push, you might be able to achieve 18%. It is a good deal, if I may put it that way, because this 18%, is quite easily attainable, considering that spoken English is something that we should be very familiar with. And in the revision package, I'll be giving you lots of tips on how to ace these components. The second point that you want to take note is your editing. 10 questions, no doubt it accounts for 5%. I would expect my students to get at least 8 out of 10 correct. And editing is something that can be taught and can be learned quite easily within a short time frame. Even if if you tell me that you're taking editing next week, I am confident of teaching you at the 11th hour and making sure you improve. And it can be done because editing is quite rigid, and it is really about applying the so-called formula, to getting the answer correct. Okay, situational writing is another area that you want to take note of because it's basically guided writing, and compared to your continuous writing, it's definitely easier to score for your SW. So take note of this 15% that you can back quite easily. All right, so let's now dive straight into what we are here for this evening. Okay, I'm going to share with you this detailed lesson plan that I've put together for your consumption. Let me just pull out this. Okay. Okay, I have not shared my screen. Let me just do it again. Here we go. Let me see. I'm looking at the student's screen to see. Okay, yes, we've got that. So we are here to talk about the online revision for GCE O-Level English Language Syllabus 1128. In the picture here on the right, you can see myself at work. This was taken during the circuit breaker last year when I was having intensified Zoom lessons, not only for my the physical classes that were switched to Zoom because of the circuit breaker, but also in addition to my usual online students. Right, so this revision package is made up of 14 lessons. I'm allocating paper 1, 5 lessons, paper 2, 5 lessons, paper 3, 2 lessons, and paper 4, 2 lessons. Let me begin with paper 4, as this will be the most immediate because come end July, you will be going for your oral examination. So if you can, take advantage of this two lessons that I'm putting forth as a priority, that will definitely help you to attain, your 20% weightage that I was referring to just now. At least get a, 17 to 18% within that 20-minute time frame. So let's take a look at this paper one. In the first lesson, I will be focusing on the strategies to maximize your score in this paper. So here we're talking about that, the weightage versus the time that you need to commit to this component. And it makes sense for you to capitalize on this. I'll be focusing on reading, which involves articulation, intonation. Well, intonation is something that many students are relatively weak in. I'm not even talking about Singlish, right? I'm talking about, stressing the syllable in a word at the wrong places, or not even stressing the syllable at all. This syllabication skill is very important for you to be able to intonate your reading well. Besides the work stress, we also need to look at the sentence stress, which is about stressing the word in a sentence, choosing which word you want to emphasize upon. So at the end of this lesson, you'll be more confident in projecting self, able to read more fluently and with varied tone. Lesson 2 will cover the stimulus-based spoken interaction. Here, I'll give a quick commentary on the difference between O levels and PSLE and how you can build on what you have already achieved at PSLE standard and top it up, with more content, more confidence in engaging the examiners, right? So it is about engaging the examiners through independent thinking. Sometimes you may need to present very original viewpoints to the extent that they may be controversial. But no worries, this is far better than giving, the straightforward, off-the-cuff, hackney views, which were, bore the examiners. So at the end of this lesson too, you'll be more relaxed and be able to engage well in the interaction or in the interaction with the examiners. Okay, let's proceed to paper one. Well, this is the scourge, if I may put it, of most students. Many students just do not like writing. I do not know why, but I guess it is not knowing the way to flourish or igniting that creative spark in one, that cause many students to be turned off by writing exercise. So in lesson 3, I'll be covering the different genres of writing: expository, narrative, descriptive, argumentative, and hybrid. The last is probably the most important for you to take note. In recent years, I have noticed that most topics are trending towards a hybrid between expository and narrative, or expository versus descriptive. So be able to distinguish and understand the expectations of the different genres is your takeaway. And also, by the end of lesson 3, you should be able to learn how to cross-fertilize your ideas from other disciplines and apply it in your expository writing. So this will, enlarge your knowledge base, which in turn broaden your contents. So I'm going to, help you to accumulate as much content during this, um, you know, brief period so that you have enough resources to apply to your writing. I would also introduce to you my practice methodology for the writing assignment. Typically, for the first draft, you have to type it out on a Google Doc, and there'll be a live review. I will be, using your Google Doc and correct it on the spot. Mention what are the strengths and weaknesses. I will do a critique and mark your work. In a live situation so that you may understand and the other students may understand why a certain sentence needs to be corrected, why a certain phrase has to be reworked, why the introduction, conclusion may not be appropriate, why there's a lack of linkages between the paragraphs, and so on. Now, once when I have edited your first draft, you are required to handwrite your second draft. And second draft means that you also have to do some editing, further editing, and improve on the first draft. Once that's done, you would have to take a picture of your handwritten word and WhatsApp to Mr. Tan, and I will then mark your work using my digital device and return back to you for your correction. Next, we move on to paper one, editing. Well, editing is a no-brainer. Why do I say that? Because you can quite easily predict what kind of items will come out. So I have listed here 8 categories of common errors: subject-verb agreement, articles, determinants, tenses, present, past, past participles, prepositions, connectors, the intention of writer, relative pronouns, singular plural nouns. Well, once you have this at the back of your mind, you would find it easier to probe for the correct answer as you attempt the editing. And I would also share with you some common pitfalls, like sentence runovers in your editing chunk of text. And there are certain strategies, like doubtful errors versus vital errors. So which one do you correct? The answer is obvious. The number of no errors, the 2 blanks that are supposed to be without errors. What if you cannot identify 2 blanks, or you have more than two blanks? So what do you do? Right? So there are certain strategies to handle that kind of situation. Well, consistency of tenses. Another very simple but effective tool. If you observe that the text is written in the simple present tense, there has to be consistency throughout the text. Conversely, if it's a narrative, it will be written in the past tense. So again, the tenses will be consistent throughout. So by the end of this lesson 4, you will be able to ace this section, meaning you would be expected to improve by at least 2 marks or comfortably move into the band of 8 to 10. Meaning to say that if you're already scoring 8 or 9, I can't guarantee that you'll get 10, but you would, at the minimum, maintain your standard and remain in the 8 to 10 band. But if you are right now hovering at 5, you can improve by 2 marks. Okay. Next, we move on to situational writing 1, lesson 5. Now, I mentioned that situational writing is, in fact, a guided writing exercise. Don't you think so? If you look at it this way, situational writing just call for ability to understand the nature of the task. You're given a task and you have to make certain decisions, all right? So if you follow the pointers and put together all the relevant items that you're supposed to include in your writing to fulfill your task, you will be in good hands. So again, there are differences between O levels and PSLE situational writing. In fact, one very stark difference is the weightage. So do not belittle situational writing, which will cost you the same marks as your continuous writing. Very unlike PSLE. And again, there are different genres. Okay, you have a report, email, letter, speech, article. Very importantly, for situational writing, you have to pay attention to the purpose, audience, and context, PAC. Now, I would also be introducing to you this extrapolation techniques to overcome ideas fatigue. Briefly, this is a very clever way to extrapolate or extenuate the situation so that you have more justification to write what you want to say, hence beefing up your SW. The strategic focus is, of course, the importance of situational writing in your paper 1. It is one very good way for you to capitalize upon to level up your paper 1 score, right? So that's the learning outcome of lesson 5. Okay, we move on to essay writing 2 in lesson 6, right? So lesson 6, I will be zooming in on introduction and conclusion, which are by far the 2 most important paragraphs in a piece of essay. Introduction must be captivating and conclusion must leave a very good aftertaste effect for the marker. We will be doing drill and practice, and one of the exercises would involve students writing a 4-paragraph simplified writing piece. The reason for this is so that we don't take up too much of the lesson time, but enough content for me to see whether you are able to apply the skills. Okay, so the 4 paragraphs will be your introduction, followed by the second paragraph, which is either, in the case of expository, your first supporting point, or in the case of a narrative, will be your plots, how you are going to develop your plots. And then in the third paragraph, in the case of expository, that will be your rebuttal point. In the case of narrative, that will be how you escalate it to a climax. And of course, the 4th paragraph would be your conclusion. I would then sample on the spot review of 2 pieces of work and explain to the class, the reason why, I have corrected the way I did, and to explain, how certain phrase, sentence should or could have been reworded or rephrased to make the delivery more succinct and effective, right? So the caveat is also that many narrative descriptive topics are not pure narrative descriptive topics. So there is this thing I want to highlight to students, all right, which is tied into the hybrid version that I alluded to earlier on. I would also talk a little bit about single topic essays. So all this will help you to be more confident in writing a coherent piece. Lesson 7 will move on to situational writing 2. So here we'll do drill and practice. So I'll do a sample on the spot review of 2 pieces. I will also give you a caveat on formal, informal structure with informal, formal tone in hybrid scenarios, which are becoming more prevalent in recent GCE O-level papers. Well, what this means is that sometimes a formal format does not necessarily mean that you need to have a very formal tone. Conversely, an informal letter or writing format does not necessarily mean that you can be casual. You have to use the right judgment to determine what is the register that you should appropriately adopt in your writing. Right. So this will help students to better understand the nuances of situational writing. In lesson 8, I have just slip in listening comprehension 1 because listening comprehension usually starts earlier. So I just want students to have adequate practice. So here, again, I want to talk about the strategic focus, in our overall scheme of the paper. This part here, especially your section A, is an area that you want to do well. Again, I'll be talking about the difference between O levels and PSLE, a great difference. LC is not the simplest component of the English paper. Make no mistake about that, unlike PSLE. Right. I would highlight to you the peculiar requirements of both sections. Section B being the more challenging note-taking exercise. How you can apply some good common sense in ambivalent situations. I would also be covering the numbering convention and the use of common sense really when you really are unable to figure out what word to put in. And then we switch back to our paper 2 in lesson 9, which is visual text comprehension. I will begin by talking about the overall purpose of a VT. Once you understand the purpose of a VT, then it is half the battle won. Yes, because every visual text, be it a banner, a poster, a flyer, a brochure, they have the same inherent purpose. I would also be covering semantics, which is about words, and semiotics, which is about imageries. The use of both words and imageries feature very prominently in any visual text. So learning outcome is for students to be able to understand the basic purpose of VT, to get those motherhood questions correct and improve scores by at least 1 mark. And then we switch back to paper 3. So in lesson 10, you'll be drill and practice for your LC. And I have also doubled down this additional exposure for your editing, right? Because as I said, editing is something that you can learn and you can do well once you remember all the grammatical formula. So this is to help you to uncover blind spots. And in the case of the editing, I'll make the link to the common test items, which are the 8 items, which I mentioned earlier on. This is to help you to improve your scores. Then we are back to paper 2, text type B, which is usually comprising a narrative or a personal recount. Now, this is by far the most challenging text for most students, not least because it is usually written in a foreign context, with a alien culture and custom that our local students might not be very attuned to. Now, here's where I would identify the common challenges, and I'll help students to at least grapple with some of these challenges. The answering techniques are just as important. Avoid repeating questioning, be concise to the point, know the difference among a word, a phrase, a line, and a sentence. Penalty for excess quotes or over answering, which students should be mindful of. Global questions, not exactly easy because the students have to identify the mood of the atmosphere or the characters as the narrative progresses through the plot. So the outcome of this lesson is so that students are able to understand the challenges of this text, type B, and apply some mitigating techniques to improve scores. In lesson 12, we will cover text type C. This is the expository information text. So same thing, I'll be going through the answering techniques. So I'm not going to repeat that. Basically the same as for the text type B. Now, one important difference between type C and type B is of course a summary writing, which will involve probably about half a lesson for me to impart useful techniques in handling summary writing. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to cross-reference text type C from your other disciplines to augment your background understanding, because these are information text and the subject is usually something that you would in your 10 years of education have read materials on those subjects. So there's no excuse really for you to be totally, unease about the subject matter. And, being able to cross-refer or, relate back to your previous knowledge on this subject, this will help you to activate your schema and enable you to increase your score by at least 2 marks. In lesson 13, text type B, we are just going to do drill and practice, and I'll be offering on-the-spot commentary on common errors made. So this is to provide you with feedback on your strengths and weaknesses. Finally, lesson 14, we'll do a drill and practice on your text type C. So again, I would do a live on-the-spot commentary on common errors made and to provide you with feedback on strengths and weaknesses. That wraps up my lesson plan for the 14 lessons. And next, I'm just going to show you the kind of online resources that I'll be using. I'll be using proprietary videos from my another registered business, Teach Well. So these are good educational resources that will be very instrumental for your learning and grappling with some of the more challenging aspects in learning the language. I have my own YouTube channel, which from time to time, I have posted very good speeches, um, opinion pieces, which I encourage all my students to view and listen in to the way I articulate those views. My published and unpublished writings, unfortunately, not all my writings are published. Okay, but I welcome all of you to read some of these writings. Even some of the unpublished writings, I would say, are very instructive. Next, I will also be using quite generously Kahoot, Quizy, IXL to enhance my online learning lessons. Just to share with you, the online teaching equipment and tools that I'll be using, just so that you know, I'm in this for a very serious purpose. I invest in good equipment so that I can deliver my online lessons most effectively for my students' benefit. I'm using an unlimited high-speed Wi-Fi, 1 Gbps home digital line, which is a top-end Wi-Fi speed. I have a subscribed Zoom account, so there's no time limit. I'm using 2 laptops, one for contingency purpose. In case there's any disruption, I can switch over to the next laptop seamlessly. I'm using an external condenser microphone, which you can see from this picture here. So this condenser microphone helps to converge the sound waves and makes for better delivery at the students' end, because the voice is not so dispersed. So my students have given me feedback that they actually find my audio very good. Okay, and I also have got this XP pen, the SP board and the pen in front, which I use for writing on the Zoom whiteboard and also for marking on your work. I have this gooseneck stand with an extra camera for optional use, just in case if there's again poor connection and students are just being kicked out of the class due to connectivity reasons. You have to WhatsApp me and I can rely on my WhatsApp messages to help you to rejoin back the class. And lastly, which I have alluded to earlier on, I'm using the Google Drive for online sharing review of your first draft writing pieces on a real-time basis. So I would go into the Google Doc, and as I review your work, make the correction, I would also be explaining to you the reasons for those corrections and how I I view it can be improved. So this is really very useful for students who would have a first-hand understanding why a certain sentence just wouldn't do, or why a particular paragraph is just you know disconnected with the rest. Okay, so let's move down to the student's baseline requirements. Now, over at the student's end, you would also have to make sure you have the minimum equipment to make the Zoom sessions beneficial. First, you must have a stable Wi-Fi connection. You need to have a laptop or a desktop with video cam. And you need to have a Gmail account for the Google Doc that I mentioned earlier on, so that you can type your work in a Google Doc and I can view it. Lastly, you need a smartphone or equivalent for backup in the event of a Wi-Fi disruption. Right, so if there's any downtime, that's very uh, unproductive. We want to minimize that. So anytime that you experience disruption, quickly WhatsApp me and I can help you to link back so that we will minimize the amount of downtime. Thank you so much.